Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Gideon, Marcus, and a bunch of other really famous, more famous than me people who comprise Galactic Journey. If you're here, it means you have traveled in time to May 28th, 1966. For those not familiar with the conceit of a Galactic Journey, we live 55 years out of sync with you and everyone else that you know, and we move forward day by day, just as you do, but back in time. So the reason you are here today is we're going to give you a little jaunt through time so you can see what science fiction is like here in May 1966. It's a particularly exciting year because science fiction has really been off the air since The Outer Limits finished its run last year. And yet we hear that there's an exciting new series called Star Trek that'll be debuting in September. And in fact, they're going to show the first 2 pilots at TriCon, which is the Worldcon this year. So we're very excited about that. Although Kris, when they come up, will tell you all about how Britain is actually doing just fine with television on television, science fiction on television. So very quickly, let me introduce our esteemed panel. So first off, we have Hugo finalist list, Cora Buhlert, all the way from Germany via Intelsat. Welcome. We have Kris Vyas-Myall, all the way from the Day the Earth Caught Fire set. One of the coolest of the Journey writers, I must say. We are constantly discussing about the books we like and don't like, and very often we have differing opinions, but it's always a fun conversation. We have Janice Marcus, the amazing editor and sometimes writer for Galactic Journey. And of course, last but not least, president and #1 member of the Tony Randall fan club, Lorelei Marcus. She has been watching television assiduously for the last 5 years and will be able to tell you all about her favorite programs like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and Bonanza and some of her other favorites. All right, so we're going to start off. This is an audience-driven program, which means the things you want to know about, we will tell you. We will go wherever you want. However, we're going to start while you think of some excellent questions to ask, whether it's about the debut of Black Panther in Marvel Comics, or your favorite television show, or your favorite book, or what's going on in the Supreme Court these days. We're going to be discussing the Hugo Ballot because, according to my latest issue of Ratatosk, dated May 22nd, 1966, and I just got this in the mail. Luckily, it's delivered from Los Angeles by Bruce Peltz. We now know what our Hugo Ballot is going to be this year. And boy, what a confusing set of books this is. So really quick, let's talk about best novel. And all of us will have some input here because all of us have read at least some of these. So we've got Robert Heinlein, you may have heard of him, and his serial, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. I don't know why this is on the ballot because it finished this year. It's a fine book, but it shouldn't be on the ballot this year. We've got Frank Herbert's Dune. That's what I'll say about that. Doc Smith's Skylark Duquesne. We have John Brunner's The Squares of the City, and we have Roger Zelazny's, also serialized, And Call Me Conrad. So I'm going to send this straight over to Kris first and want to know what they think of this particular ballot.
Well, I would say that I feel like for me that for different reasons, and Call Me Conrad is the only one that really should be on this ballot. As you say, Moon is a Harsh Mistress was, I think it had maybe 1 or 2 parts last year. It wasn't, you wouldn't even really say it had half of the serial available last year. So really that's one that should be on the ballot this year. And if it is on the ballot in the 1967 Hugo, it will probably get my vote then. And Squares of the City is not a science fiction novel. It's published by Balticon, and it's written by John Branagh. But it's just a political thriller that happens to be based slightly in the future and basically has people moving about like it's a chess game. Some people think it's very interesting. I found it incredibly contrived and dull to read. And the Skylark novel,
you and Algis Budrys.
Yes. And I feel like Skylark really is probably only on there because of because of Doc Smith's passing, and so it's probably people see it's the only chance for him to get a Hugo. Although we will say later that he is also on the all-time best series for other complicated reasons. Dune, I read the whole of Dune together and I kind of enjoyed it, but I feel that with Dune World having already been nominated for the Hugo, really it should be only Prophet of Dune. You shouldn't be putting the two of them together. And if we're just considering Prophet of Dune, I don't know how well that would work as a novel on its own. So my vote would definitely be for And Call Me Conrad. If you haven't picked it up, I know that I believe Ace is publishing it as This Immortal in a couple of months, so you can always pick it up then.
Well, that's good to know. It was originally serialized in fantasy and science fiction, and for me, Zelazny ranges in quality from Hemingway hackish to sublime, and people who like Zelazny tend not to distinguish between the two. I would say that And Call Me Conrad was at the high end of what he does. Cora, what are your thoughts on Best Novel this year?
Well, I have to say I was pretty disappointed by this ballot. Like Kris, I also think And Call Me Conrad is the best of the lot. It wouldn't have been something I wouldn't have nominated, but it's a good novel. Dune, well, it already was on the ballot as Dune World. Also, I know a lot of people love it, but and it has some interesting ideas and interesting setting, but it simply went on too long, too much, walking through the desert and so on. Honestly, Dune the covers were better than the story itself. I really don't. The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. First of all, it didn't finish until April. It has a wonderful title. It has a great premise of a penal colony on the moon. But what does Heinlein do with it? He puts in strange group marriages and very, very young girls getting married and her being pregnant, and a lot of talking about self-reliance, libertarianism. It's sort of good premise, ruined by Heinlein's personal writing, his personal hobby. Squares of the City I haven't read, and honestly, what I've heard doesn't appeal to me, so I can't say anything about this one. What I would have, and Skylark Duke, I've been told it's pronounced Duquesne, so I just pronounce it that way now, the name, but that's what someone in Louisiana told me, that's how we pronounce that name. I don't know how it's pronounced, so okay. At any rate, Doc Smith is, I know he's a big name, but he's never really worked for me, and Skylark Duquesne is very old-fashioned. It's a sequel to a series that started almost 40 years ago in the 1920s. And the supposed hero commits genocide, and I honestly don't think it would have been on the ballot if Doc Smith had not sadly left us last year. And yes, I'm kind of disappointed. There's a lot of books I would rather have seen there. The Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch by Philip K. Dick would have been a great finalist. The Sundered Worlds of Stormbringer by Michael Moorcock. The Escape Orbit, also known as Open Prison by James White, or The Rician Terror by Damon Knight, were all great books I had on my personal list, but yes, this is the one they went with.
Now, Lorelei, you have read at least one of these books, and you're a very young woman, so you're fairly unusual in terms of demographics who've read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. I would like to know what you liked, what you thought of it, and what you liked, and maybe what you didn't like.
So, like you said, the only one on this ballot this year that I've read is Moon is a Harsh Mistress, and I would actually argue it is unfortunate that it probably caused other books not to be able to be on the ballot this year, but I would say that the best part of Moon is a Harsh Mistress is the very beginning, when it sort of sets up the premise for the book. And it was some of the most science fiction-y of it, and the most interesting part of it was the first part. And so in some ways, I think that's part of the reason it made it onto the ballot. You could say, well, the first part that was written last year that was the best part is what's being up for an award. I really liked it. I was riveted through the whole thing. I actually quite enjoyed the complicated interplanetary, or I guess I should say intersatellite politics. I had a lot of fun actually with the complex relationships and marriage dynamics. I do think that there was some of the characters probably were a little bit too young to be in the relationships that they were, but there was also a lot to be said for how the book dealt with gender dynamics, and by creating a society, I think, where women have all the power is kind of unheard of in fiction today. And I thought that was very innovative in how Heinlein handled that. But of course, my favorite character and the premise for the book is the living computer Mike, which I think was just how he writes Mike and deals with that concept is just absolutely inspired.
Janice, do you have thoughts on Heinlein's book?
I think the gender politics was very interesting. As Lorelei noted, the creating a society. We featured. I think it was either Kris or Victoria Silverwolf who wrote an article about that set up the different stories where female-dominated societies. And the problem with these female-dominated societies as written by men is they often come across as very unrealistic and have elements of wish fulfillment in them a lot of times. And I feel like this was a little different. It was a little more unusual. And certainly it inspired some interesting conversations between me and Lorelei about consent and power and what it means to have power in a relationship. I also remember that the Skylark Duquesne was fairly poorly reviewed by our own fanzine. And of course, I recall your opinions on Dune. And so it seems like this ballad is one that is less stellar than some of the ones we've seen in the past.
The question was asked why Bill the Galactic Hero wasn't on there. I think there's two reasons. One, it originally came out as Star Sloggers in Galaxy the year before, so people may have felt that it had already been covered. But the other, of course, is there's a lot of America chauvinism, and so things that appear in, say, New Worlds and science fantasy, things that appear in the British magazines like Bill the Galactic Hero, tend to get overlooked, just like the British television show Out of the Unknown. This year, for dramatic presentation, the winner is going to be no award, which is ridiculous. There's plenty of things to give awards to. People just aren't looking very hard, I suppose.
To be fair, it's difficult for Americans to watch British television.
It is difficult, but what surprises me is that the Worldcon was held in London last year. So I would think that there would be a contingent of British people who pay for memberships this year, just so they have the ability to influence the ballot, but perhaps they can't afford that whopping $2 Worldcon attendance support fee, or the $3 in-person attendance fee. God help us if inflation should make, say, by the year 2021, the cost of supporting membership as high as $20, because that would be absurd. And if it was as high as $50 to attend, I'm sure most people wouldn't be able to attend. So I hope that Worldcon remains an inexpensive and affordable commodity for our science fiction fans.
I think Kris had something to say about the British shows on American television.
Go for it.
I didn't have anything particularly to say, but I can talk about it if you like.
If I might, I'm really surprised that Alphaville didn't get nominated. The Jean-Luc Godard film, okay, it's a French film. It was a hit at all the big festivals. It is the only science fiction film ever to have won a Golden Bear at the Berlin Film Festival. It was a huge success at the London Film Festival, but apparently it's not good enough for Worldcon. We'd rather have no awards and give it. I mean, I'm not even the biggest fan of Alphaville, but it would have been an absolutely deserving Hugo winner, and instead, yes, we're going with no award because America hasn't put out anything, which is depressing.
Stupid Americans. Lorelei, Janice, are there any movies or shows from last year that you would broadly put in the science fiction or fantasy category that you would have put on the ballot?
Well, Doctor Who, I have only read Jessica Holmes reviews because obviously I don't have access to it here in the United States. I heard an audio recording that was mailed to us of the opening, and that was quite exciting. But it does seem like Doctor Who is making an effort. It seems like it's a variable in quality, but it seems like they're making an effort to have a lot of science fiction based stories. So certainly the idea of the TARDIS is a unusual one and kind of fun. I'm not sure if I would have voted for it, but it certainly comes to mind as one that if there was more exposure to it, I think people would probably vote for it.
How about you, Lorelei?
Honestly, I think I might need a refresher on what science fiction movies came out last year because my mind is just full of all the Tony Randall movies I've been going to see. Those don't really qualify as science fiction for the most part.
Fluffy has a laboratory in it.
That's true.
And a lion.
The brass bottle
I would
is
say probably the things that you have seen that might qualify are the Bedford incident, and also and of course you've read Jessica Holmes's Doctor Who articles. I guess the question is, if you stretch a point, does the Addams Family qualify for dramatic presentation?
Well, I would vote for it anyway, just because it's a fantastic show. Well, I mean, considering that we don't know what several of the family members are, I think it could qualify like that. There's a certain amount of fantasy there, and Fester's ability to make light bulbs light up with his mouth is somewhat science fiction-y. So I think we can make it count.
So
and what about the brass bottle, Lorelei?
we don't talk about that movie.
Well, and I think it actually came out in '64 anyway.
That's right.
Well, this is a very unusual Galactic Journey panel, as there are no questions. The audience is not doing its job. So we're going to either that, or you are so wrapped with our presentation that your brain is just utterly in reception mode, which is fine.
There was a question about how was Planet of the Vampires. I believe we did review that one.
Victoria did, I think.
Yeah, I think
Victoria, that had to be Victoria Silverwolf.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure we reviewed that one, so we can. I don't have access to my back issues at the moment, but later I can put up a.
Oh no! It was Jason Sachs, who unfortunately could not be here, which is a shame because. So.
He's a delight.
Jason actually quite enjoyed it. It's an Italian director, and apparently he quite enjoyed it. And there is a review of it. If you look in the back issues of Galactic Journey, you will find a very nice double feature review. And I will jot it down on a piece of paper here for everyone to enjoy. Two great questions. So the first, why don't we, since we're still on the Hugo Ballot, why don't we talk about Best All-Time Series Award? And actually, I know Cora has some great words on that. So, but while Cora is talking, Janice and Lorelei, think about what classic science fiction series in short story or books you think should have made the ballot. But Cora, tell us what you think of this ballot.
Well, I like the idea of an all-time best series award, of course, because by now we have enough series to qualify. My pick would be Foundation by Isaac Asimov, because I first read them as a very young girl, these original stories when they came out in Astounding in the 1940s, and they blew my mind, and I still love it. It's a bit sad that, I mean, of course, the ending of what is now known as Second Foundation, and I think it was Now You Don't, was the title of the actual story, is amazing, but it's still a pity that he never continued writing. It's only those now 3 books, and I think there are about 7 or 8 stories, and he still had 500 years to go. But yes, it's a great, huge expensive series, mind-blowing concept of how to people trying to make the world a better place. And I think I was at exactly the right age to read it when I did. I'm not sure if I would have liked it as much. I revisited some of them last year and I no longer loved them as much, but okay, it meant a lot to me and this is what I'll be voting for. Lord of the Rings is, I think, the reason we have this category, because it came out in the US in paperback in a probably illegal edition only last year. But those of us in Europe, Kris and I, have already read it when it came out about 10 years ago. And it's an amazing work. It's unique in the history of our genre. It's fantasy rather than science fiction, but I think everybody who's read it by now knows that it's an amazing piece of work. It's also not very far from typical US pulp science fiction, because Tolkien is an academic, he's a professor in Oxford, so it's a very different type of work. I like it, but I don't love it as much as many others do. The Bassoon stories by Edgar Rice Burroughs are great fun, and I like them, but they're also very old-fashioned. I mean, The Princess of Mars came out 55 years ago, so it's very old-fashioned, and we've seen better stories about Mars told since then. I would say I'd rather have Lee Brackett's Martian stories or the Northwest Smith stories by C.L. Moore on the ballot than Bassoon. Sorry, they're much better. Landsman, yeah, I've already talked about Edward E. Smith. I'm sorry, Doc Smith. His work just doesn't work for me. I mean, he's dead. I can't insult him anymore. So, and there's Heinlein's Future History. Okay, I've read some of the stories. There's some good stories there, but it's similar. I think he's trying to do something similar to Asimov, but Asimov's foundation simply works better as this huge, expansive centuries of future history than the Heinlein ones. Also, some of the stories are good, some of them are not. I think we need Mark Yon because he reviewed all of them. As for what's missing, okay, I already said Lee Brackett, C.L. Moore. We could also have Little of Glory, the wonderful stories about a medieval sword woman by C.L. Moore from the 1930s and early 40s, which I would have loved to see. I'm really surprised we don't have Conan or Solomon Kane by Robert E. Howard there, but it's probably because they're being reprinted, the Conan stories, but they're out of print, and Howard also died 30 years ago now. I think next month, 2 weeks, he committed suicide, sadly, in 1936. But the Conan stories are still great adventure fantasy. I've just been rereading them. I got a stack of old weird tales, so yes, I could reread them, and they're still wonderful. I'm surprised they're not here. What else is missing? Missing Verfahrt in Grey Mauser by Fritz Leiber, still being published. It is actually Stardog. One of the stories is on the ballot, but I would have loved to see it get a best series nod, because they've been consistently great for 27 years now, which is a rare feat. Okay, and that's it for me. So.
Kris, is there a series on there? One, is there a series you're going to vote for? And two, is there a series you think should be on there?
Well, I'm probably going to vote for Lord of the Rings, but again, it's very tight with Foundation for me. I think again, it's because I read The Hobbit, as most British kids did in the 1940s when it came out, and so that was really an introduction to fantasy for me. And then seeing the sequel in Lord of the Rings and sort of having my mind exploded by that really impressed me. Whilst Foundation I didn't read till I was slightly older, till sort of the books were coming out in the sort of late 50s, early 60s years in Britain. So for me it's Lord of the Rings, but it's very close to Foundation. In terms of stories that series that I would like to have on there, I think Cora has covered a lot of interesting ones. Maybe Clark Ashton Smith's, I don't know how to pronounce it, it's Sophic series that he did in Weird Tales. Those were very good ones. And on a similar note, I suppose they're only just continuing to become a series, but Jack Vance's Dying Earth stories, which have always very much impressed me.
Notice the conspicuous absence of Thomas Burnett Swan's retellings of mythology. which have been very well received in the magazines, but none of which showed up in the ballot in any way. I thought that was interesting. I would have liked to have seen Murray Leinster's Med series. Certainly would have liked to have seen Zena Henderson's People series. I recognize those are stories and not books, although there is one compilation out and maybe another one coming.
Definitely Zena Henderson.
But yeah, honestly, this list is kind of awful because I never finished Lord of the Rings. I always founder at the Battle of Helm's Deep. I've never finished Foundation. I always stumble over the mule. And yeah, and Barsoom is not Burroughs' best setting. I prefer Pellucidar and Kaspar. So, Janice, is there something you would recommend?
What about Instrumentality?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, Cordwainer Smith definitely doesn't get the recognition he deserves. May he live long and produce many more stories in this field. Lorelei, can you think of anything? I don't know, Wizard of Oz?
Honestly, I don't know that my expertise is in short or in novel series. I am part of the youth heathen who spends their time watching television instead of reading these days.
And listening to records.
Yeah.
That's fair enough. Someone asked why there were no short. Did we notice that there were no short stories from Analog on the ballot? Looking through our records, because we keep meticulous records, and I think me and Kris are the most anal about such things. But Analog had very few standout stories this year. My favorite were all by James Schmitz. But for the most part, the best stories ended up in fantasy and science fiction or the British magazines. So I'm not surprised Analog doesn't have them. Analog is thoroughly workmanlike. They occasionally pull one out, like Randall Garrett's first Lord Darcy story was excellent, but his second one was just okay. All right, so I am asked, and I'd love to get everyone's opinion on this one. What do we think of Harlan Ellison? It's interesting you asked that because I just read his nonfiction book, Memos from Purgatory, about his time in a gang in New York, which was particularly interesting because I had before that, even before I knew that book existed, because I found it secondhand at a bookshop, I had seen the James Caan starring adaptation of the book that was on an Alfred Hitchcock Presents a couple of years ago. And it was pretty good. It starred a fellow named Walter Koenig, who was the head of the gang. And he's not in a lot of television these days, but I thought he turned in a good performance. Anyway, Harlan Ellison, I think, is pretty great. Whatever you might think of him personally, and he's his personality is out there, and I know there are people on the LunCon committee that wish they'd never heard of him because he called them at 3 o'clock in the morning last year to harangue them to make sure there was a dramatic presentation category, so that way his scripts for The Outer Limits might be nominatable, and then he didn't win. But there's no
Which were not nominated.
Say again?
They were not nominated because the British fans had not actually seen the Outer Limits stories, which are good by what I've heard. But instead, we had Dr. Strangelove, which eventually won, and the 7 Faces of Dr. Lau, which Lorelei would probably have preferred because there's a lot of Tommy Randall. But I mean, there were excellent finalists. But okay, Harlan Ellison Helsing people didn't even help in the end.
Well, what's really interesting too is we've actually, speaking of Lorelei, we've actually seen quite a bit of Harlan Ellison because he wrote at least one of the scripts for Burke's Law, which is a show we watched regularly. And he had a character in it played by Sammy Davis Jr. named Cordwainer Bird. And then last year or 2 years ago, we saw the absolute worst script for Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And it was written by Cordwainer Bird, which we now understand is how Harlan Ellison says that his script was hacked to death and he doesn't want his name associated with it. What does everybody else think of Harlan Ellison? Janice, go ahead.
He's an interesting writer. He's quite a character. And I'm waiting to see what he does next.
Do you feel he's deserving of his reputation, positive and negative?
I think overall he's a good writer. As I recall, he's a fan turned pro, right?
Correct.
And I think that's inspiring. And I think I've liked what works of his I've read. And I think he has far to go. So I'm going to wait and see what else he comes out with.
I understand he's been tapped to write for the new Star Trek show, which I definitely want to discuss, because Star Trek may have a pedigree in current science fiction, which would be fairly unprecedented, and I really want to discuss that. Does anyone else have any thoughts on Harlan Ellison, Lorelei, or Kris?
Well, one thing that's hard to judge with Harlan Ellison is at the moment is that so many of his stories aren't published in the science fiction magazines. He publishes a lot in the, let's say, adult male markets. He publishes a lot of fiction there that's apparently science fiction, but whilst I find him inspiring and a good writer, I don't have enough to want to pick up an issue of Knight or Esquire in order to find one of his stories. So what we've got of him has been good, but it seems like it's a small section of his output so far. So it'd be very curious if he ever does any collections and we get to see what he's been pumping out to these other markets, what his overall style of writing is at the moment.
Lorelei, are you familiar enough with Harlan Ellison to have anything to say?
I've enjoyed the television episodes that he's written scripts for.
Except Cordwainer Bird.
Plankton!
There's one or two that had his actual credit as well, and I don't think any of them stood out to me profoundly, but I think he's an interesting up-and-comer, and I definitely have some respect for him with his devotion to his writing, especially with the story you told me about him choosing to join a gang so he could write about it.
And by the way, we have in fact covered Repent, Harlequin Said the TikTok Man. Yes, you say the whole thing. And it's interesting because when I originally reviewed it, when it appeared in Galaxy, I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was okay. I thought it was a little overwrought. And then I read it again in Pain God with the introduction, which, by the way, actually, I like the introduction to Pain God so much. I remember reading it in the queue for sushi to Janice and Lorelei one day. It's a very good introduction and a very good collection. And according to the notes, Harlan wrote this story about people being punished for taking away time from the perfectly calibrated society. He wrote it because he's a terminal procrastinator. He has absolutely no sense of time. If he says he'll be there at 7, he'll be there sometime next Thursday. And I'm the opposite. So I have a lot of time relating to that, but I appreciate now the basis of the story. And so I kicked it up from 3 to 4 stars. I don't think it belongs on the Hugo ballot, but I can understand why it might connect with people such that they wanted it to be there. All right, I want to talk about Star Trek. So the reason I want to talk about Star Trek is until now, science fiction on television has been pretty tame stuff. We've had a lot of anthology shows. Twilight Zone didn't come out of nowhere. In fact, we had Roald Dahl hosting a show, Alfred Hitchcock, Boris Karloff. So when Rod Serling appeared with Twilight Zone, he was just one among many, but of course he turned it into something a cut above and set a standard, I believe. And Twilight Zone was interesting in that it had a lot of bona fide science fiction authors providing episodes for it. Richard Matheson, Charles Beaumont. But Twilight Zone was a straight anthology show. There's no connection between the episodes unless you count the fact that Burgess Meredith appeared about 18,000 times. The Outer Limits was also in the same vein and even more specifically science fiction. If Outer Limits had any common element, it was the fact that it always featured a man in a suit. Usually a rubber suit, although there is an episode starring Martin Landau in which he is a man in a suit who transforms into a man in a suit. But aside from that, science fiction on television has been very slim pickings. I mean, we've had it on radio. We had the X-1, which was adaptations of Galaxy stories, which was great. And there was another one, which is adaptations of analog stories. But on television, aside from Man in Space, which was not very interesting, we haven't had much. And last year we had 3 fantasy shows pop out. We had My Living Doll, Bewitched, Addams Family, and Munsters, but all of them were comedies and all of them were only broadly SFF. And all of a sudden we have this fellow named Gene Roddenberry who'd done one other show called The Lieutenant, which I saw every episode of because it was based in Oceanside, which is 10 miles from my house. And Star Trek is either going to be the worst show we've ever seen in the world, something akin to Irwin Allen's Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And if you like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, that's great. But, or Star Trek could be amazing because from what I understand, it's been sold as combining science fiction anthology shows with real science fiction writers, including Harlan Ellison, with a serial crew. And I think that could be very interesting. They've tapped Bill Shatner, who was on a couple of Twilight Zone episodes and is quite good. Leonard Nimoy, who's been also on the science fiction shows and also a bunch of others. Filming just began on the first episode of Star Trek last week. So this is something that is happening right now. So when I talk about adult science fiction, what I mean is it may be the first show on television to not explore themes that have been mined out 30 years ago. And may take stories straight from magazine pages of, no more than 10 years ago when science fiction was new and innovative. It still is, but I mean, that's when it started. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And I wonder if anyone else has any comments on science fiction on television and what they're hoping to see in this new show, Star Trek. And I will start with Lorelei.
Not Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. That is what I'm hoping for. But I'd say
We're on a show right now.
In general, I am looking forward to, or I'm hoping for actually an interesting cast. I'd say that one of the downfalls of various new shows this season is things like Batman, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. The characters in it are not very good. The actors are not great. So I really hope that, like you said, William Shatner, Leonard Nimoy, that those are some promising names, and I'm excited to see who they have, if they're gonna have a serial cast, who they have on the crew each time. Hopefully charismatic and professional enough to really carry the show.
Janice.
Well, let's see. I would love to see science fiction stories that aren't about a gotcha, the way Twilight Zone sort of became. There's some wonderful Twilight Zone episodes, but there's also a lot of gotcha or twist in the tail, gasp in the last 5 minutes of the show. I would love to see some cool, clever space exploration and interesting stories, interesting relationships between the characters, interesting aliens. I think that they could do a lot, especially now that things are in color more and more. It's really exciting and new to see that, and I'm interested to see what they do with that. I'd love to see a woman on the bridge somewhere. There are so many stories about male ship captains, and the female cooks on the ship. The woman who's brought along to take care of the men, because the men obviously can't cook for themselves. We laugh, but that is very, very common. And I would love to see a woman in a position of responsibility who is not there just to support the men. So we'll see if Gene Roddenberry does anything with that. I've got high hopes for the show, but I also have seen some of the other things that are called science fiction these days, like Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. And I know that a lot of the shows are more, there's a lot of more juvenile shows. We were talking about Doctor Who, and again, I haven't seen it, but I've read a lot about it, and that's very much a sort of supposed to be an educational show aimed at children. So I'm hoping that this is a show that is, while hopefully family friendly, will not be specifically children targeted. So we'll see how it turns out.
Like Lost in Space, I should have mentioned that. Another Irwin Allen show, and terrible. Lorelei, what are you looking forward to in Star Trek?
Didn't you ask her already?
Oh, never mind. We've talked to you. Don't say anything. Cora, how about you?
Well, first of all, I hope that I actually get to see it sometime because I'm in West Germany and we often get US shows with a delay of 5 years or so. Bonanza only just started and it's hugely popular here. But we will be getting our own science fiction show sometime this fall. And it appears to be similar in concept to Star Trek. It will be called Raumpatrouille Orion, Space Patrol Orion, and it's also a story about a spaceship with a steady crew having science fictional adventures in space, which sounds very promising. They're currently shooting in Munich. It's apparently the most expensive West German TV show ever made. Of course, we haven't had TV. We have only had West German TV for 14 years, but still, it's very expensive. And they have a great cast of film and TV veterans. They have Dietmar Schönherr, who is an Austrian actor and really good. They have Eva Flug, who is amazing. They have another female. They think have another Charlotte Kehr or someone. Oh, they have Wolfgang Völz, who's mostly more a comedian, but he's great. And they have Klaus Holm. They have, from what I've heard, a great cast, and at least the great cast should carry it. I hope that they also tell good stories. And yes, it would be even better if the world had 2 new science fiction shows than just one of them. And I hope it will be good.
To Janice's point, I said I'd be very interested to see if there would be women authors, screenwriters for the show. Women produce about 10% of science fiction right now, about 25% of what's worth reading. Maybe Lee Brackett could submit a screenplay or two.
She's also a screenwriter. She's also screenwriting these days. I think she does westerns mostly, but she would be perfect, of course. Lee Brackett, of course, as well. I mean, they're some of our best science fiction authors and screenwriters.
And Kris, really quick on Star Trek before we go to comics.
Yeah, it's interesting what you're saying about Star Trek. Obviously, again, being in Britain, we usually get the worst of US TV over here quickly, and the best of it will take years and years to come over. So it'll probably be forever before one of the channels buys it up. But it's interesting you're saying about the way that they're doing it, because it sounds very similar to the approach of Doctor Who, because that is basically an anthology show. They literally just turn up in a new time and place every single time, but just have the crew of the TARDIS be the adjoining part to each one. And interestingly, also, there was, even though there's not science fiction authors writing for it, it was based around real science fiction authors, because they asked, when they originally came up with the concept, they asked Brian Aldiss what was going on in science fiction that they could possibly adapt. And so he came up with 5 stories that might be good to base it on. And they chose Paul Anderson's The Guardians of Time, which to be fair was probably a good move. Like, some of the others were interesting, but I'm not sure whether or not adapting C.L. Moore's No Woman Born and having if that many kids would want to watch 15 episodes a year of Robot Dancer. But the thing is that one thing that does make me nervous is that I don't know that they would whether it would work as well on American TV, because you don't tend to have the serialized format that you have in the UK. So Doctor Who will do between occasionally do 2 25-minute episodes. It tends to be 4 25-minute episodes, or even up to like 13 episodes. And I'm not sure, could you really do a good science fiction story in that 15 minutes without it being a Twilight Zone kind of gotcha? Like, if lo and behold Doctor Who ever went down to like 15 minutes an episode, I feel like it would probably just never work as a show and just disappear completely. So that would be my nervousness, but hopefully the team can get it to work well.
So we've been asked if there will be a Hugo category for comics, which I think is interesting, perhaps premature. What are your thoughts on that, Janice?
I'll jump in here then. Well, it's interesting because we've seen some interesting developments in comics lately. Jason Sachs has written some really fantastic articles, as has Cora Buhlert, about comics. And I suspect that if we ever do have a comics-based category for the Hugos, that it will probably, sadly, still end up being very US-centric, which is a shame, because as in Cora's really excellent articles, she explores the many different comics available all over Europe, and it's a fascinating article. I recommend checking it out at galacticjourney.org if you can. But thinking specifically of superhero comics and the comics that might be eligible for the Hugo, the popular ones being put out by National Comics and Marvel they've gone through some interesting shifts. They were very sort of juvenile for a while there, and lately they've been bringing in more sophisticated ideas. They've even had villains who become heroes. They've had two different teams with disabled leaders, and the technology that they use to get around and do things. They have people with, psi powers and other sort of more modern concepts of superpowers. So I'd be very interested to see what would get the nomination if we did have a comics category. And I think that it's getting to be to a point where comics have more and more, there are more and more comics with a level of sophistication that would qualify.
And interestingly enough, we have our first Black, I don't know if we can call him a superhero yet. He's only appeared in one issue of the Fantastic Four. He's the Black Panther, and all we know about him is he's the chief of Wakanda, a very technologically advanced country, and he invited all the Fantastic Four over so he could beat the tar out of them. And we're just about to find out why he did that, but we have to tune into the next issue, which comes out in a few days. Just real quick.
Sorry, I just want to say, as Kris pointed out, that's pretty much a handshake in superhero comics. That's small talk.
We were asked about John Campbell, Larry Niven, and Fred Soberhagen, three people who rarely appear in the same magazines. But the answer is Fred Soberhagen's been around a couple of years, and he's made a mark with his Berserker stories, and they tend to be around the 3 to 4 star range. He's well thought of. Larry Niven is very new. I've enjoyed everything he's put out. Nothing's blown me away, but I've liked all of it and actually read it to Janice and Lorelei as bedtime stories. Kris is not that fond of him. And as for John Campbell being past his prime, I will speak no ill of the fellow beyond what I've written in letters that he has refused to publish. But I will say that Fred Pohl opines that the man is past his prime. So if you have a problem, you can take it up with Fred Pohl. You don't need to take it up with me. We have about 2 minutes left, and I want to thank everyone for coming. Does anyone have any final comments about any of these topics they want to bring up?
I could I could speak to the Lord of the Rings, since it's on the ballot this year. It was noted in one of the questions that it took off this year. And I think a big part of the reason for that is because it was suddenly available in paperback at a less expensive price point, when before it had only been available in hardcover and was out of most people's reach. So it made a big boost to its popularity. There was some discussion of whether it was illegal or not, but as far as I know, the company involved did make a deal with Tolkien in the end and paid him, and everybody was happy at the end.
$9,000, and you can bet that Tolkien was happy to get it. He was against the publishing of his works in puerile form of paperback, and yet here he is now, much more famous than he ever would have been without it.
Something to be said for pricing your books in an accessible way.
Cora, Kris, you got a minute.
I suppose I can just say that that on comics, British comics are also very interesting right now. Because what they do is they tend to work in anthology format, and so there's probably somewhere around 200 to 300 strips running at once weekly, because magazines will have like 10 to 12 of them in each issue, and so they range from like really interesting sort of golden age science fiction following the rise and fall of an entire galactic empire, down to stories where a schoolboy has a robot that comes with him to school and gets into mishaps. So there's a lot out there. It's very variable in quality, but it's all interesting.
And we have to go now, but we hope we will all see you at Galactic Journey, where we put out an article every other day. And And I guess we'll see you next year. Maybe at Worldcon. Thanks very much, everybody.
Kris, I'd forgotten that you did articles on comics.
Well, we published a lot of comic articles in a short period of time, so.
Yeah. So I was just picking out the most recent ones that had stuck in my memory, but then I was like, oh yeah, Kris did that great article. Or was it one or two articles?
Apparently the audience can hear us now.
Well, hopefully they'll go to galacticjourney.org and click the little comics on the side. And
Yeah, and check out our radio station where we play only the latest new hits.